All right. Welcome, everyone. Holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 15. Again, I want to welcome everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 15. We are in verse 25. Spoke last week, I guess, about the severity of being family purity laws, forbidden be with the spouse, during that time of the month, or it doesn't go to the mikveh. So we spoke about the severity of that punishment. Punishment is being spiritually cut off. That is definitely pretty, that is pretty severe. As we have mentioned. So we are now going to continue. Book of Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25. Torah tells me, "Ve'isha ki yazov zov damo yamim rabim." Klois nidasa o kitazova nidasa koyime zov tumaso kime nidasa tia tamea he. The Torah tells me, we spoke before in verse 24. What did the Torah tell me? Torah told me that if a man lies with her, during that time, then it's going to be impure for a 7-day period. And anything that he may sit on or recline on is going to become impure. So we saw before that it's going to be forbidden. Going to be forbidden for a man to be with his wife during that time. Right? That was verse 24. We spoke about the severity of that. Now verse 25 is a little bit different. Verse 25 tells me if a woman's blood flows for many days outside of a period of separation. So now what happened? What happened was she saw blood flow after she got a period already, right? So there's a time frame which the Torah here says is outside of this period of separation, or she's flowed beyond her separation. Again, she had a flow that is not, part of a period, something separate. All the days of impure flow shall be like days of separation. She's impure. Right? So we have to see exactly what's going on over here. Right? Because the very beginning tells me that she has blood for many days. Right? Many days outside a period. Now the question is, what does many days mean? Right? That's the question. Right? We're going to see. But this is something that doesn't have to do with the period over it. Something different, right? She has the flow, she has this discharge, right? Discharge of blood, and she'll have the status of a zivah, right? Or a zava, as we've been speaking about. But again, this is separate from a normal flow. So says Rashi over here, what does it mean many days? Many days means 3, right? We're going to have to see why. We have to see why over here. Maybe it means 2. Maybe it means 5. Right? Maybe I say it means 5 or 4 or 8. It's definitely more than 1 because it says plural. Right? But Rashi over here learns we're talking about 3 days. So he learns from the Medrash and the Mishnah and parts in Zavim that says that when the Torah uses the plural noun, does not specify a number. Right? So the question is, how many days? So it says over there too. That's the minimum amount of days. If the plural is being used. So yamim, the word for days over here, implies at least 2. Right? For sure it's going to be more than 1. Now it says yamim rabbi, many days. If it only said yamim, I would know it's 2. So the fact that it says many implies an additional day. Right? So that's where Rashi learns out 3. Then the Torah tells me outside the period of her separation, Now Rashi says, what does that mean? It means after the 7 days of her separation, have elapsed. In other words, she had 7 days. She had 7 days, she had a flow. And then she continues. Because normally the amount of time is going to be 7 days. Now, technically, it could be longer, but in general, it should be only 7 days. Right? 7 days, and then, at least according to the rabbis, they'd have to count another seven clean days, which means it's really a total of 14. Right? At least, if it's, let's say it's 7, you get another 7 days. Where, there can't be any flow. Can't be any problematic colors over here, let's say. So therefore, if she's clean another 7 days, very good. She goes to mikveh, everything's fine. If, let's say, she's spotted, and a woman can spot, right? Even if it's not the time she should see, but that can render her impure. So what happened? She saw for 7 days, and then she saw a few more days, right? She saw for 7 days. We understand, that's the time of a period. Okay. So that's very good. But what about the other days? So now she saw a whole bunch of days, right? So 3 days. Could have seen longer, but let's say she saw 3 days, right? It says over here, as Rashi said before. So that cannot be part of a period, right? That's not the norm. Unless, let's say there's a wound or a cyst or something that you can attribute, the blood coming from that. But again, all things being equal, if there's still a flow over here, it's not part of a period. It's a separate entity, right? Separate entity. So Rashi says, we're talking about where the 7 days have elapsed, right? Because what does the Torah say? Right? The Torah says that her blood flows for many days outside of a period of separation. If it's outside a period, it's not part of a period, right? Not part of that. If it's not part of that, there's going to be something else. And this is the status we're going to see as a zivah or a zivah. So then Rashi said, if she had a flow beyond her separation, right? What are we talking about? These 3 days. Now, interesting. What's Rashi commenting on? What are we talking about? Beginning of verse 25, again, Book of Leviticus Chapter 15, verse 25, it says a woman's blood flows for many days, right? Outside of a period of separation. And then it says she has a flow beyond her separation. Now, when it says many days at the beginning of the verse, we don't know what it's referring to. We don't know if it's necessarily referring to, this period of separation or not. Right? It could be that it's gonna go according to the phrase as to the flow outside a period of separation. Because I don't necessarily know what it's going on. Is it going on the days of her separation or outside? Not clear. Right? Seemingly not clear. Right? Because it could apply as well to the flow outside of her separation. Right? Seemingly that's what it's talking about. But I could have said not that way. I could have said if you only talk at the beginning, so I should think it's only during that time. Why would I think it's separate time over here? Because now we have this part of the verse. Right? If it's flowed beyond her separation, technically I don't need to say that. I can just say it floats right after a separation. There's a little bit superfluous. Comes on Rashi and says, no, it's talking about those 3 days. Because I might have thought it's only going on the days of separation. It's going on the 7 days. Then Rashi says, what does it mean? Beyond her separation. Because it says if she has a flow beyond her separation. Okay, so what is this? What is this a reference to? Right? It could be. He says we're talking about something which is distant in time. From the time of her separation. Right? What does it mean, distance of time here? It could be 1 day, it could be more, right? Either of these cases could be a case of a zivah, right? It's not one or the other, right? If I say it's one or the other, I'm in trouble, right? Why? Because who says it's talking about the same thing? Either you tell me, you could say, well, it's talking about time separation, or you tell me it's talking about beyond that, or maybe it's talking about both, right? Could be it's talking about both over here. So what does Rashi say? We're talking about something distance in time, right? From a period of separation, could be 1 day or more, right? And that's the case of a zivah. Now, why does Rashi say that's the case of a zivah? Because it's not at the time when she should be seen. In other words, we understand 7 days, right? If it's clear it's 7 days, then anytime she sees after that, that's not part of that flow, right? Because when she gets the period, it stops at some point, right? It stops usually after 7 days, right? At least 5 days, but most likely up until 7, right? So if it stops at 7 days, then what's the point she's seeing now? Seemingly it gets, it'll seem to trickle, won't be so much, and then eventually it stops. So by the end it stops, then why does it continue? You're not part of that cycle. I mean, unless you tell me it's a really messed up cycle, but that might not be the case, right? In this case, that's not the case, right? What are we talking about? She had the status of a zivah, right? She had a status where she had this flow outside of her period, so it's not normal, right? It's not part of her period over. That's the point. So now, how do we look at it? Says Rashi further, her laws ruled upon in this portion of the Torah. Right now, when we talk about a zivah, even though we talked about discharges before, now we're talking about a specific discharge of blood. So that's where it starts. Starts right here, verse 25. Right? That's where it starts. Now, it's not like the law, Rashi continues, not like the law of a woman who's impure due to getting her normal period, which we discussed in verses 19, 24, spoke about that last week and the week before. So it's not really talking about that. It's totally different. Why? Because in order for her to be pure in this case, what does she have to do? In order for her to become pure, this zivah, right, who had a discharge after the 7th day, right? So she has this discharge after the 7th day. So what happens? What does she have to do? She's required a count of 7 clean days without discharge, right? 7 clean days. 7 clean days after discharge, right? She didn't have, then she go to the mikveh, right? That's talking about the zivah. And she'd have to bring an offering, right? 100% she'd have to bring a sacrifice here. But if it's just during her normal period over here, right? She doesn't require, according to Torah, a count of 7 clean days, right? That was added on. That was, it's a whole nother thing. But according to the Torah, she only needs 7 days. If she stops seeing blood after 7 days, technically after 7 days, she's clean, she's good. She goes to the mikveh and everything's fine, right? But according to the rabbis, you have to wait another 7 days. But a woman in this case doesn't require a count of 7 clean days, but rather she'll be in a state of separation for a 7-day period, right? And that's what we said by verse 19, right? In verse 19, when a woman has discharge, right, from seeing blood, she'll be in a state of separation for 7 days, right? So by a zivah, that's more stringent. She got a 7-day period, and then she has to wait another 7 days. By a regular period over here, not the case. Not the case. She only has to wait 7 days, and that's it. Right, as it says before in verse 19. Right, she'll be in a state of separation, 7-day period. That's it. She doesn't have to wait another 7 days. Right, whether she sees blood beyond her initial flow or whether she does not. Interesting. What happens at the end of 7 days? The end of 7 days, she can go to the mikvah, right? She can immerse. She doesn't have to bring any offerings, right? If it's a regular period. Now, a woman, we'll just say in general that if she has a discharge comes from the uterus or at any time has to wait at least 5 days, right? She has to wait at least 5 days. Usually, I didn't take a survey, but between 5 and 7 normally until the discharge is stopped, right? And then she has to have 7 days free of discharge, right? Before she immerses. Now, there could be questionable colors over here. That's why we have to be showed to a rabbi here, right? To see if that, if it's a color makes it forbidden or not. But in any case, you'd have to wait. You have to wait a 7-day period. So what's the difference over here? Sorry, an extra 7-day period. So what's the difference? In one case of a zivah, she only has to wait 7 days and she has to bring a sacrifice. In the case of a menstruating woman, right, a regular case, she only has to wait 7 days. But she doesn't have to bring a sacrifice over here. Now, so that's the general rule. So now what's going on over here? We had a 7-day period, right? 7-day flow. Now she has another few days. So now if she has another few days, what is it? Do I say it's part of the 7-day flow? She just had an extra flow. Or is it something else? So says Rashi over here, the sages came and explained like this. That after, there are 11 days that intervene between the end of one cycle and another. Right? The end of one cycle, the beginning of another. So there should be at least 11, maybe 12 days in between. He says 11 over here. So we'll say 11. Should be, at least 11 days. Unless, she continues to see a flow, whatever the case is. So there's an 11-day distinction between, or interval, let's say better, between one period of separation and the beginning of the next. So there's an interval over here, right? There's 11-day interval. So any of these 3 consecutive days, which she sees the discharge of blood during the 11 days, it doesn't mean she has the status of a niddah. She doesn't have a status, of a woman during her separation. Why? Because this isn't the time she should see. 100%. Right? It's a totally different time frame here. The time frame over here is that after 7 days, she shouldn't see any blood. There could be complications, whatever, but in general, she shouldn't see any blood. Now, if she shouldn't see any blood, what's this blood here? What's this blood for 3 days? That's going on for 3 consecutive days. So Rashi here says, explaining according to the rabbis, right, as the Talmud tells us, that there's a 11-day interval between each period, right? And any 3 consecutive days that she sees blood during the interval time, right? During these 11 days, she's going to be considered a zivah. It's not the normal time she should see. So what are the rabbis telling you? If it's not the normal time for her to see, then what are these 3 days over? Right? It's something not normal. It's something that shouldn't happen. So where does it come from? So it doesn't come from, a normal period over here. Why? Because she's not supposed to see. So if that's the case, then we have to account for these other 3 days, right? Because what did the Torah tell me? A woman's blood flows for many days outside a period of separation. Because in verse 19, we already understand she's going to be impure for 7 days. So what are these many days over here? What's this other separation? Right? It can't be part of a period, right? She should already have stopped. Unless there are other complications, right? But in general, that shouldn't be the case. So if that's not the case, we have to come up with another explanation. Comes along Rashi, brings from the Talmud. And the Talmud says what the rabbis learned, that there's an 11-day cycle in between from the end of this period to the beginning of the next. So if a woman sees in between that means she's a zivah. that means she has a status of a zivah over here, right? So now, let's explain from the beginning. First time a woman has a flow of blood, she's impure. Why? Because she's a niddah, right? She's got the status of being a menstruating woman, right? And she's going to be impure. She's going to have a state of separation, right? They keep it clean over here, no pun intended. They call it a state of separation, okay? That's how it's translated. Fine. That's a normal separation. How long is she in that state for? 7 days. Now, if the flow ended by the 7th day, what does she do? She goes to mikvah, right? She goes to body water. She goes to mikvah, whatever it is. And that's it. She's permissible to her husband. Now, if she has a flow of blood during the next 11 days, let's say she went to the mikvah. Next 2 days, everything's good. Then she has a flow, right? Then she has another flow over here. So what's it for? What happened over here? So if she has a flow of blood during the next 11 days, it's not because of her period, right? It's not, she doesn't have the status of a niddah. That's not the issue. The issue is what? The laws of a zivah, right? She becomes a zivah over here, right? It's brought on by what? By this discharge, because there's an 11-day difference. There's an 11-day difference over here, right? From the beginning, from the end of this period to the beginning of the next. So if that flow lasts only 1 day, or let's say not for 2 consecutive days out of the 11, then she can immerse herself after it stops. But if she has a flow for 3 or more days, right, they have to be consecutive during those 11. Then she cannot immerse herself until she has 7 days free. Then there's no flow. In other words, if she only had 1 or 2 days when she's not really supposed to see any blood, so then what are we going to say? We're going to say that if it stops, she can immerse herself, that's fine. If it happened 3 days, 3 consecutive days here, then she has to wait another 7 days. If she had no flow during these 11 days, or she had a flow of no more than 2 days, or even 3 consecutive days, but she had 7 clean days, after the zivah lapsed, then she's again subject to the law of niddah, right? So essentially, what we're saying is there's an interim period. There's an intermittent time where you got 11 days between the end of this period and the beginning of the next. Now the question is, how many days, did she see blood for? If she saw blood 1 day, okay. If she stops, not a problem. If she sees blood for 2 days, also not a problem. Once she sees blood for 3 days, then she's going to have the status of a zivah. If she has the status of a zivah, then that means that she has to wait another 7 clean days. In other words, she could see for 3 days. I mean, in theory, she could see more. But let's say she sees for 3 straight days. She sees 3 straight days. She doesn't see after that. So she has to wait 7 clean days. After 7 clean days, she go back to her husband. But most likely, after 7 clean days, probably the next flow is going to start, or shortly thereafter, right? Depending, what type of cycle is it. So explains, Rashi. It does get a little bit complicated, and the laws of niddah, family purity laws are complex. Certainly have to be learned, if it applies, if it applies to a person. If someone's married, they both convert. Before the conversion, they have to learn these laws. It does get complex, but it's something that has to be known. It has to be known well, because if not, so then you have a Torah prohibition. You have a Torah prohibition being with your spouse when you're not allowed to, and the punishment is getting spiritually cut off. Right? That is downright, a tremendous thing here. Right? Very strong thing over here. It's not just something to say, oh, the rabbi's this, the rabbi's that. The Torah makes clear. If you don't go to the mikvah, if a woman doesn't go to the mikvah, she gets spiritually cut off. right? We saw last week, probably there are many children born in this type of situation. So their status, they're blemished. They have definitely a blemish on their soul. So someone came to the Rebbe we mentioned last week, someone came to the Chazon Ish, and someone had mentioned a marriage partner, and this woman was the subject of this type of, she was born this way, right? Parents did not practice family purity laws, so there's a blemish. So question was, should a person, marry such a person? Now you gotta tell me, okay, there's a blemish. There's a blemish that's true, on the soul, but the Chazon Ish answered, but if this person's going in the right direction, they're keeping Torah mitzvahs, they're trying to raise themselves to high spiritual levels, they're going to keep these laws, then it's okay, right? Then that has the power to overcome, right? Ramosha Feinstein, of blessed memory, would knock this out very simple, right? He would say at some point it must be that, a woman, probably went to the ocean, right? The famous response, she probably went to the ocean, or maybe, she went to a swimming pool, something where she wouldn't have this status. Doesn't matter why she went. Obviously, she's not having intention over here to be pure for her husband, right? Certainly not the case. But he said if it acts like a mikvah, right? She goes to the ocean, which can act like a mikvah, or she goes to a stream that's deep enough and all that, let's say, then that wouldn't be an issue. Then that would take down the issue. But even so, right? Even so, without that, the Chazon Ish said, not a problem, right? If she's going in the right direction, right? She wants to raise herself to a higher spiritual level, she's growing, then you can marry her, right? It's the Chazon Ish did not bat an eyelash, right? Because the language was, I'll just go through this again, right? The language was, if she sanctifies herself, purifies herself through keeping mitzvahs, then even though this is a pretty severe impurity, right? A very strict impurity over here, and the person is blemished in any case because of this, not their own fault, but this is the reality. Nonetheless, the fact that she continues to work and strive on herself, be the best she can be, then that can overcome this, and it's possible certainly to have generations, of great righteous children, right? So even without coming on to what Ramosha Feinstein says, Chazon Ish says through purity, working on ourselves, we can overcome that, right? We can very much overcome that. And we see today, there are great people that came from parents that did not hold by these laws. You see that there are great people, that come from, converts and others, their souls, whether they like it or not, is blemished because they weren't born Jewish. Doesn't matter, their soul is on Mount Sinai. So they have to go through this purification process, right? They have to, obviously take on Torah, mitzvahs, etc., and go to the mikveh, etc. So that's a tremendous thing. Tremendous thing. They can overcome that. Right? I'm not going to say it's easy by any stretch, but by going through the motions and doing what they need to do, they have tremendous status. There are certain things, okay? There are certain things they can't do. Certain people they might not be able to marry. Very good, right? But that's only because of the technicality, right? They could be the most pure, righteous person, that ever existed since the time, of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. That doesn't matter. There's technical issues. Right? I gave a class on this up north, probably about a month ago, or a number of weeks ago, that a convert cannot be a rabbinic court judge. Right? The status is that if it's dealing with other cases, with a case where people come in front of them are converts, they can judge it. If they come in, in front of a case where all three are Jews, not converts, if they accept them, fine. Then that's not an issue, right? That's not an issue. And obviously, if they know their stuff and they're considered, like some of the greatest of the generation, also not an issue. So what's the problem? What's the problem? Why are we going to discriminate, against potential converts or converts, let's say better, if they're a rabbinic court judge? What's the issue? Where's it learned out from? Right? So it's learned out from the verse that talks about a king. And a king of the Jewish people has to be, the Torah says, has to be mekerev achicha, from amongst your brethren. Now, convert, technically speaking, was not part of your brethren. Right? It was non-Jew, converted. So you're going to say, but don't they have the status of a Jew? You're right, they do. 100% they have the status of a Jew. But even though they have the status of a Jew, remember, they weren't always Jewish. So therefore, technically speaking, again, it's a technicality, but this is how we hold. The convert can never be a king. It can never be a king. So, and what else do we learn by a king? We learn that a king is power. What we call in Hebrew, srara. He's got power to enact things, kill people. He's got a lot of power. So since the king has to be from a born Jew, right, this is going to be from a born Jew over here. So we're going to learn out that a convert cannot have that type of power. So by being a rabbinic court judge, that's a position of power. Right, that would be a position of power. Maybe being the head of yeshiva, maybe being a rabbi of a synagogue, right? Or, giving classes in the yeshiva. Maybe that's also a position of power, right? Maybe that should also be forbidden. So it says, Mori Rebbe, Rabbi Gon Ramosha Sturmach should be well. So says Ramosha Feinstein, a blessed memory, a Torah giant of the last generation. Nothing to talk about in America. And both agree that the head of a yeshiva and, giving classes in the yeshiva, not a problem. Not a problem for a convert. These are not positions of power. You tell me the head of the yeshiva, can expel people, can decide who to take, not to take. Isn't that a position of power? No. Right? Why are they taking him? For his knowledge. That's why they're taking him. Right? Same thing by someone giving classes. Right? Someone teaching yeshiva students. So also same thing. They're being taken for that very simple reason. Now, a rav of a synagogue is where Sternbach and Ramosha Feinstein disagree. Ramosha Feinstein would say any of these positions not a problem. Right? He knocks it out and says not a problem at all. Sternbach would say by being a rav of a synagogue, that's an issue. Right? There are a few issues. Right? But one of them is that, let's say you have a convert and he has a son, right? Oh, let's say better. A rabbi of a synagogue. That's not necessarily the way it works today. It does definitely in the Hasidic world, this is the way it works. And that is, if someone's a big Rebbe and the Rebbe passes away, who takes over? Usually one of his kids. Right? Usually, what if he didn't have sons? What if he had son-in-law? So probably son-in-law will take over. Right? But usually it goes in the family. There are a number of yeshivas like that. The Mir Yeshiva, for instance, right? In order to teach there almost do anything, you have to be related to the Finkels, right? That yeshiva, of recent memory was Rav Nathan Zvi Finkel, blessed memory, right? Who became the Rosh Yeshiva after him was his son. Right? His son took over, but he took over from his father-in-law, Rav Nathan Zvi. Right? Then he had Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, married to a Finkel. Rav Nachum Partzovitz, same thing. So whatever, you had people, it was in the family, right? It's I don't even want to call it a mafia. I wouldn't call it a mafia per se, but there are certain yeshivas, certain places, it's in the family, and that's the way it works. By Rebbes, for sure, that's how it works, right? So now, based on that, a convert that converts is considered a katan shenola adami, considered like a newborn child. If they're considered like a newborn child, then even their kids technically not related to them. Sound a little bit harsh, Right? You gotta say, what do you mean? They're my blood, they're my flesh and blood. You're right. I'm talking in spiritual terms. Right? In spiritual terms. Now, let's say they don't convert. Let's say only the kids convert. So the parents, technically, yeah, they're the parents by blood. Spiritually, they're not the parents. Right? It comes up a lot of different things. A lot of different things. So what did Rav Sternbuch say over here? Rav Sternbuch explained, very simple. He says, by a non-Jew that converts, let's say better, by a convert. So there's no din, there's no law of inheritance by a convert. Technically speaking, if a convert died, anyone could, take their property. Technically, they don't have any heirs. You're gonna say, but what about my kids? Okay, the kids aren't related, but let's say they wrote a document, they have a will, and in their will it goes to their kids. Different issue, right? And they give their money, their estate, they give it to whoever they want. That's not an issue. But technically speaking, by a rabbi of a synagogue, who's he going to pass it down to? Probably his kids. Now, today it doesn't necessarily work that way, right? And in a lot of synagogues, they won't necessarily take the person's kid unless they're fitting for the job, and if not, they'll take someone else. So technically, I would say it's not really a position of inheritance. Far from me to argue that's what Sternbuch held. But in general, even if you want to say, that's not an issue. What about the problem of srora? What about the problem of a position of power, right? So a rabbi of a synagogue, unless he's not getting paid by the synagogue, who are they dependent on? They're dependent on the board of directors, right? The board of directors are calling the shots, not them. Unfortunately, what they're allowed to speak about, maybe not allowed to speak about this. Be careful about, they're paying the salary, right? So, there are rabbis that get paid otherwise. They do other things. They might get paid by the synagogue also, but they have other jobs, right? But, some of the best out there, that, I've learned the most Torah from, Rav Sternbuch, Rav Avigdor Miller, of blessed memory, Rav Brevda, of blessed memory. Rav Avigdor Miller had his own synagogue. It didn't really matter. He said whatever he wanted. You read his pamphlets on Shabbos, you hear his tapes, he said whatever he wanted, right? He didn't know anything to anybody except to God. Rav Brevda never had his own synagogue, but he spoke all over the world, right? He had to answer to his rabbis, right? Most likely Rav Yechezkel Levenstein, of blessed memory, who was the spiritual mentor of the Mir Yeshiva in Panovich, here in Bnei Brak in Israel. And Rav Sternbuch. Rav Sternbuch never, he had to answer to his Rebbe also, right? But he never had, even in his own synagogue, not like there's a board of directors. No board of directors there. He says what he wants. People don't like it. What will the answer be? He'll say, go eat kugel. You don't like it, tough noogies, right? And he speaks very strong. They all spoke very strong, right? No question. So, and they didn't have to answer to anyone. They didn't have to worry about what they said being politically correct, right? Anyone's ever read any of Sternbuch's Torah, he's not politically correct. He'll never be politically correct. I just read something from a couple of weeks ago in the Hebrew Parsha CD rails against governments and against all the reform measures and everything. Pull any punches. I mean, he does it on a weekly basis, right? He didn't pull any punches. He doesn't care. What are they going to say? Okay, he's a fanatic. Very good. Right? But he says sometimes you got to speak out. If you don't speak out, it's 10 times worse. 10 times worse. You let these things go on and no one says anything. He says what's going on here in Israel. You're going to have reform people, reform rabbis in charge of kashrus. That they don't even believe it. Right? It's craziness. A lot of craziness going on. So, these rabbis didn't care. They had to answer to God. That was it. They spoke the truth, the unadulterated truth. And their people didn't like them because of that. Okay? They didn't, you don't have to like them. But they're not pussyfooting around over here. They're telling it the way it is, to calling a spade a spade. In today's day and age, nobody wants to hear that, necessarily. I get flack also. Because I can't believe, how could you say, this, that, might offend people, so don't listen. You don't want to listen to Rabbi Mizrahi, Rabbi Yaron, don't listen to them if they speak too strong, right? People can't handle it, okay? Doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true. Doesn't mean what I'm not saying is true. Right? Okay, so maybe you tell me you got to be a little more sensitive. Got in trouble a few weeks back by saying that a Noahide goes in front of a court, and he should go in front of a court to say that he's taking on the Noahide laws. I don't know. Nobody does it today. Very few people do it today. Right? And certainly the Rambam doesn't hold to that. I mentioned that before. The Rambam says in the Laws of Kings, right? Chapter 10, Mishnah 8. I think, or it's chapter 8, Mishnah 10. I forget. I think it's chapter 10, Mishnah 8, whatever it is. And he says over there that a non-Jew should make a declaration in front of a rabbinical court. Who is he talking about? A ger tosha. What's a ger tosha? A non-Jew that lives in the land of Israel is going to go against idolatry and the 7 Noahide laws. That he's got an obligation to do. But that's only when we have a Jubilee year. There's no Jubilee year. There's never going to be a Jubilee year until the Messiah comes. So if that's the case, and a non-Jew wants to make a declaration, they want to make a declaration, they can. No one's saying they can't do it. Right? I got myself in trouble because people want to do it. Okay. Is it worth anything? Is it worth anything halachically? No. If they take that and they bring it to the chief rabbinate today, is that going to help them with anything? No. Not going to help them with anything. You tell me, okay, in the time of Shemitah, of sabbatical year, and they want to sell, land to them, okay, better selling to others, fine. But again, halachically speaking, doesn't mean a whole lot. So I was very graphic. I said, it's not worth the paper it's written on. I said, it's like a tissue. It's like it's like toilet paper. That's what it is. I called it what it is. It's just, people's feathers got a little bit ruffled. So I said, okay. So last week I made clear. Person who wants to do it, they're allowed to do it. 100% they're allowed to do it. Does it have any halachic binding? No. Does it? Makes them feel better? Okay, that's worth something. So if a person feels it's worth something, very good. So let them do it. Obligated to do it? No. There's no obligation. Not only is there no obligation, but the Rambam states clear it's only about a ger tosha. It's only about someone who lives in the land. That's the only obligation. And if that's the only obligation, that's only when there's a Jubilee year. If there's no Jubilee year, does it apply? Doesn't apply. Doesn't apply. Now, someone's going to say, so why are you hammering this point? I want people to understand. We're not making up a new religion over here. You're right. There are rabbinical sources that say it's okay. Okay? You ask majority rabbis today, what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you don't have to do it. You're not obligated to do it. Right? Now, should they do it? Depends on them. It makes them feel better. Okay. But we're not making up no religion here. Let's make clear. Right? Again, I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I want to make sure people don't straddle both worlds. Right? And the only obligation is by the Jubilee year. So yeah, I could be a little more sensitive. Could be. My Rebbe and other rabbis, yeah, they could also be maybe a little bit more sensitive. But you know what? The truth is what it is. It's not about being politically correct. That's not what Torah is. Torah is about telling the truth whether people like it or not. I'll give you an example. Give one example. The laws of Lashon Hara tell you, you're working, and the boss said, you have certain information the boss wants. And the boss says, I want this information. I know you have the information. I want you to give me this information. Problem is, you can't give the information. You know why you can't give the information? You can't give the information because it's Lashon Hara. So the boss puts pressure on you. And he says, I need this information. And you say, listen, no offense, I cannot give you this information. Not allowed. Not allowed according to the Torah. So the boss pressures you. Other people pressure you. And you don't give in. So then the boss gives you an ultimatum. Right? The boss gives you an ultimatum. And what's the ultimatum? The ultimatum is, if you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. You're going to get fired. Now, technically, the boss, I don't think it really has a leg to stand on, right? Because this would be an issue of religion. But he could get sued for this. But if the boss says, give me that piece of information, or you're not coming to work tomorrow, you have to give up your livelihood. In this case, you have to find another job. The person's going to say, come on, is that really what the Torah wants? This is what the law is. We're not gonna make this, a little bit touchy-feely, make everyone feel good. That's not what Torah is about. Torah is about understanding what the reality of our actions are. And if a person, getting back to our topic, and if a husband sleeps with his wife, at the wrong time, she doesn't go to the mikveh, he's liable to be spiritually cut off. Right? It's a very, very severe prohibition. It's not something we play with. You want to call it spiritual cooties, whatever. The Torah tells me clear. Forget what the rabbi said. The Torah don't forget, but the Torah tells me clear in verse 19. The Torah tells me that a person has to separate from his wife when she gets her period for 7 days. So I'm not even going to mention the other 7 days. For 7 days. Oh, you want to tell me it's spiritual cooties, it's this, and it's backwards, and it's normal. It's normal. It's a normal situation. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares according to science? It's normal. The Torah tells me it's forbidden. Not only does the Torah tell me it's forbidden, but the Torah says if you don't do it, or you transgress, you get spiritually cut off. Isn't that pretty severe? I can tell you what Kabbalah and other things say, right? I don't want to scare anyone here. It's pretty darn severe. An extremely severe prohibition. Not something you want to mess with. The Torah's not politically correct. Torah doesn't have to be politically correct. The Torah is stating it the way it is. Now we have to understand why. And now we have to understand over here, okay, there's a difference between the 3 days after she stops, seeing blood, and now it's got a different status. And if it's got a different status, in one case she'd have to bring a sacrifice, in another case she wouldn't. Okay, that's the difference. But if she sees three full days, right? Not full days, she sees 3 days in a row, then she got the status of a zivah. If not, then once she stops after 1 day, 2 days, she goes back to the mikveh, everything's good. Right? That's status. But someone here mentions, but you need to say a blessing for the dip in the natural sea or the mikveh. You're right. Right? You'd have to make a blessing as well. True. Not for a zivah. There's no blessing for a zivah here. In other words, if she went to the mikveh after 7 days, she makes the blessing in the mikveh, then she's allowed to be with her husband. By zivah, she doesn't need that. I don't think there's any blessing by zivah. I have to double check. I'm pretty sure it's not. Right? There would be no blessing. Right? By niddah, it's a different story. Right? She's married, so it's a different issue. They're both married, so let's say better. If it's just a regular period, then when she goes to mikveh, she'll have to say the blessing. Right? But if it's a zivah, or she has a status of a zivah as it's known, so fine, it's different. Right? You won't have to make the blessing. I don't think there is any blessing, by a zivah. Right? So that would I think that would answer that. Comes on the Rabbeinu B'chai. Rabbeinu B'chai is bothered by the Torah says Yamim Rabbi. It says many days. Doesn't tell me how many. Right? Another reason why you need oral law. Doesn't tell me how many days. So he goes to the whole thing of learning why it could mean 2, why it could mean 3, why it could mean more, etc. So then the Medrash brings out a Medrash. And the Medrash says, what does it mean many days? Many days means 7. It doesn't mean 7 days of niddah. 7 days of separation. Okay, so the Medrash then asks the question, very good. So why is it called many days? I can understand, tell me 7. Why are you telling me many days? Right? Because he brings a proof from Kings 1, chapter 18, verse 1. It says over there, it says in those many days, God came to Elijah in the 3rd year telling him, go to Achav and I'm going to bring rain. Right? So many days over there means 7. Right? Seemingly. Says Medrash. Says the Medrash, but doesn't it say when it talks about it wasn't 3 years, right? Because what did the Medrash say? Medrash brought this verse from Kings and says that Eliyahu should go in the 3rd year. Right now, it wasn't after the 3rd year. The Medrash says, but really, it's 1 month in the 1st month, and then in the 2nd year, in the 3rd year, it would also be in a month, right? So it doesn't mean just after 3 years, right? It means a month, 1 year, month, the 2nd year, right, etc. The Medrash says. So you need the Medrash to explain, otherwise, see, when it comes to learning Tanakh, that's why it's kind of ironic. I would say it's actually, humorous in many ways to see how, Christians learn Tanakh. Because they don't have a running commentary. They don't have midrashim. They're okay. They make it up as they go along. They'll say they have their own rabbis, their own scholars, blah, blah, blah. Right? But when you look at something like this, what would I say? Right? I would say very simple. You're bringing this verse, right? You're bringing this verse and you're telling me it means 7. Or you tell me that these many days, how are we going to interpret it? They bring me a verse from Kings, and it says that Elijah's going to go in the 3rd year. He's going to go to Achav because there's a problem with rain. Right? There's no rain. So God says, okay, go in the 3rd year. So now, if I was the Karaite, I'd say, okay, at the end of 3 years, or sometime during the 3rd year, he's going to go tell Achav. That's what I would think. That's simple explanation, right? That's what the Medrash says, right? It's explained. It doesn't mean during the 3 years. It means at the end of 3 years. It means 1 month in the 1st year. You go, then the 2nd year, you go for a month. You go tell him in a month in the 3rd year as well. So then he says, but why does it say Yamim Rabbi? Why does it say many days? So he brings down and he says, because those days are bad. Those days are evil. Why those days evil? Those days are evil because there was no rain. Right? No rain over here. They're bad days. Also, we have another proof. Another proof in Joshua chapter 11, verse 18. Rabbeinu Bachai says, it says many days that Joshua went and fought with the kings in war. That's also not good. Doesn't matter if he's destroying them. War's never good. No one ever wants to go to war. Right? But he uses that language. Many days. He gives another case. Over here in Chronicles 2, chapter 15, verse 3. And it says over there, for many days, the Jewish people did not serve the God of truth. The Kohen didn't serve and there was no Torah. Also bad. So when it says many days, there are many times where it's bad. Right? The problem was over there, they served idols. And that's why it says many. So now, the fact that it says many days, or it says many with the word days after it, right? So what would we say? It seems bad. It seems bad in many different contexts. Okay. So now, someone will ask me the $1 million question, right? It's beautiful. What does it have to do with a woman when she gets a period? So he says, so too by a woman, she has to separate from her husband. And these are days of tsar. These are days of difficulty, suffering. They want to be together, even if they can't be together. That's why physically, it doesn't mean, they shouldn't be able to touch or whatever, but in this case, they can't. They can't pass things to each other, do other things, without being intimate, right? So it's a time of suffering. That's why it's called many days. Right? So explains the Rebbeinu Bachai. So that's the connection. That's the connection. So it doesn't really matter if it's a natural thing. There's going to be a separation. But during the time of separation, how do we look at it? We don't look at it as, oh, this is a great thing, and everyone's whistling Dixie, and everyone's having a great time, right? It's a time of suffering, right? They both suffer. They want to be together. They want to be able to hold hands. Whatever. We'll keep this clean. Whatever they do, they don't want to feel like, certain subjects we probably shouldn't talk about. We can't hand things back and forth, right? The rabbis made all these fences around the Torah so you didn't come to, a worse transgression. Okay, right? But it's a time of suffering. It's a time of difficulty, right? It's a natural thing. Not only that, but it's a time where a woman's not going to have a child, right? She won't be able to conceive. Now, we saw before, Rebbeinu Bachai said, okay, all women, out there, still get their periods every month or whenever. Who do they have to blame? Eve? It's all Eve's fault. She ate from the tree, right? She ate from the tree. Because she ate from the tree, there's a punishment. Man has to work the land, right? We always have to work hard for for a livelihood. And she's going to have trouble in childbirth. She's going to have hard childbirth. She's going to get her periods, also going to be hard. And she's going to have difficulty raising kids, right? All in one action. So, all the women out there, you blame her. It's her fault. She brought that to the world. Otherwise, technically speaking, it should never have happened. It wouldn't have happened in the world. But okay, so God went to plan B, right? And that's what he did. Now, says Mori Rebbe, over Rava going to Moshe Shlita, this should be well. And he brings in his commentary, Torah Vadas, and he says the following, brings the Medrash, brings an unbelievable Medrash here. And he says like this, he says that is a tremendous novelty. He says the time the Jews were in the desert, were in Egypt, let's say better, when the Jews were in Egypt, the women never saw blood. The women never got the period. Because of the fear of the Egyptians. They never got the period. Even when they were in the desert. The fear is over. The ones who survived. They came into the desert. They also didn't see blood. Why? Because that's where God's presence was. In fear of God. So imagine the fear of the Egyptians, the fear of God made them not see blood. Made them not to get their period. So he says, what do we learn out from here? He says, we learn out from here the unbelievable level of the women of the Jewish people, because in that generation, they feared God. Tremendous fear of God to the extent where they didn't get their period. Right? They were so terrified. They were so terrified that stopped. Right? So if they had that unbelievable fear, and that's what happened to their nature, you're going to say that's unnatural. What a woman, woman in her prime, she's not going to get a period. I can understand, if you tell me, she's on steroids and on other things, a major athlete. Yeah, that I can hear. Right? That I can certainly hear that, women can skip periods and all that. But here, what's the issue? The issue is fear. Absolute fear. Right? Fear of man, fear of God. And even when they were in the desert, they had such fear of God, they didn't get their period. So Rabbi says if that's by women, they have that level of fear, all the more so by men. We're not going to exclude men over here, right? Men also had fear. And I will ask a question on this in a second. But essentially, men also had fear. So you see the unbelievable level of the generation, the generation that was in the desert. that merited to such high levels of spirituality that affected them physically. Now, we could ask a question, right? This is the greatest generation in the history of man. 80% of the Jewish people get wiped out in Egypt. They don't make it out of Egypt. So only 20% get out. So we know it's about 2 to 3 million people, give or take, because there were 60,000 men, not including women and children from the ages of 20 and 60. That's about probably 2 to 3 million people all together. So you tell me, wow, according to this medrash, look at the high spiritual level they were on. Look at the fact that they saw God face to face on Mount Sinai and survived. Right? Some commentaries say that they heard God speak twice, they died, God brought them back to life. After that, they heard the rest from Moshe Rabbeinu. Others say no. Others say that what? That they heard all 10 commandments. By hearing all 10 commandments, they died, they came back to life. But they heard all of them from God himself. So this is the greatest generation in the history of man. Absolutely nothing to talk about. So what's the obvious question? The obvious question is, so what happened over here? What happened with the sin of the golden calf? You gotta say that's different. That's the Erev. That's the mixed multitude. Right? The mixed multitudes. The converts came out of Egypt or other places. And Moshe Rabbeinu took them, converted them. They went to Mount Sinai. They're the one that caused it. Well, what about all the other times? You read the book of Numbers. You have Korah. You have the Meraglim, the spies. They complain about meat. We want meat. You know, we missed the watermelon in Auschwitz, in Egypt. We miss all these things. Complain, 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 complain. Unbelievable. So what happened to the high spiritual level? What happened to the medrash over here? We knock out the medrash? Right? So yeah, they were at an incredibly high level. Anyone who came out of Egypt, incredibly high level. Saw God face to face, incredibly high level. So how could Korach made such a mistake? Because jealousy killed him, technically. Totally killed him. You know, when they complained, they didn't think they were up to the level that God thought they were. You know, old Mother Hubbard, ain't nothing in the cupboard. The manna came, no more food, what's going to be? How do I know I'm going to get the manna tomorrow? How do I know it's going to come the next day? Well, it came for the last year, came the last few weeks, probably going to keep coming. How do you know? They didn't think they had that level of faith. There are different ways to explain what was going on, where their lack of faith was. But it's very hard. These stories are very hard to understand on our level. Because if you're talking about the greatest people since the history of man, that greatest generation, how in the world could they sin? Even before Mount Sinai. Right? Or let's say better. Right after Mount Sinai, what happens? What happens is you have the sin of the golden calf. Now, by the sin of the golden calf, you tell me, okay, it was the Erev. It was a mixed multitude. They're the ones that sinned. Right? They're the ones that caused the damage over here. Okay, very true. But the thing is that if you look at the commentaries over there, and Aaron says, okay, let the women bring all their jewelry. Throw into a fire, boom, out comes the golden calf. First of all, Aaron is stalling, the commentaries say. Right? First of all, he doesn't think. Second of all, he doesn't think they're going to give him his jewelry. They're going to give him their jewelry. Right? So there are a lot of ways the commentaries try and answer up, that the Jews didn't really, it wasn't really so bad over here. It wasn't idolatry. Now, if you look at the verses, they put the jewelry in, said a couple of ineffable names of God. Out comes an ox, eating, talking. It's golden calf. And they say, what did they say before that? We're gonna do this, and we're gonna have this big party tomorrow. And this is the God took us out of Egypt. Tremendous mistake. Very serious mistake. Where God wants to wipe out the entire Jewish nation. but we have to pay for it every generation. God has mercy, didn't wipe us out, but every generation we pay for this. We pay the price. Now, that being the case, we see over here an unbelievable thing. We see the sin of the golden calf, and we see the verses. Doesn't it sound like idolatry? Everyone will say, whatever language you read it in, sounds 100% like idolatry. 100% like idolatry. Doesn't matter if it's a mixed multitude or not. It's idolatry, right? Seemingly it sounds like idolatry. Everyone would agree it's idolatry, right? Not too hard to fathom. Come on. And what about Aaron Cohen? Aaron Cohen said, I never had anything to do with this. I was stalling. I knew who the real God was. I knew you were coming back, right? But he was stalling. He was stalling over here. So at some level, he gets punished. At some level. But anyone else reading the verse will say he had a part in it. Maybe he didn't want it to happen, but he had a part in it. What do you mean he had a small part? He didn't have a small part. Doesn't seem like a small part. So if you look at the commentaries there, commentaries go to town, trying to explain why the sin of Aaron was minute, if that's why it wasn't idolatry. They jump through hoops by going through the verses and dissecting the verses and understanding exactly what they're saying. Just like, we'll give one example. Just like, Yaakov steals the blessing from Esau, and Yitzhak says, you Esau, my firstborn. So what does Yaakov say? I am. Esau is your firstborn. Now, there's a trap there, right? How you're supposed to, chant the verse when you read the Torah. So there's like a comma in the sentence. Yaakov says, I am. Now, first of all, you're going to ask the question, Yaakov's the pillar of truth. If he's the pillar of truth, how can he lie over here? So someone will say, well, maybe he's allowed to lie because when it comes to someone who's evil, you do whatever you can to get holy things out of them that they shouldn't have. If a non-religious Jew has a Sefer Torah, right? He has a Torah scroll. And a person worried is going to be, abused or whatever. You can steal it, technically. There'd be nothing wrong with it. I spoke about this in, I think, this year's video on that parsha, right? And spoke about that. So you do whatever it takes. It's not forbidden over here. You do whatever it takes. It doesn't belong to him. Doesn't matter why he has it. He's going to abuse it. He's going to misuse it. So if that's the case, you do whatever it takes to get it away from him. Okay, you get caught, you go to jail, a different issue. But I'm saying, in spiritual terms, you don't let him abuse it. You don't let him abuse it. So it's permissible for Yaakov to steal it because it doesn't really belong to Esau. Yitzhak wants to give it to him. Okay, it's a whole discussion. Why? And why doesn't give it to Yaakov? But okay, it's a different issue. But the point over here is that when he gets the blessing, first thing, one of the things that Yitzhak asks him, he says, are you Esau, my firstborn? Now, if Yaakov's the pillar of truth, he can't lie. You could say he's allowed to lie over here, right? You could say that because he's doing it whatever it takes to get this away from Esau, right? But what does the Torah tell me? How do you read it in the Torah? You read it in the Torah by saying that Yaakov says, I am, comma, that's the way it's punctuated. I am Esau is your firstborn. Now, technically speaking, it's not a lie. But you're going to say, if I read it straight, it says, I'm Esau your firstborn. Okay? But I can answer that by saying he's allowed to lie. 100% he's allowed to lie over here. But even without that, I don't need to come on to that. Because if you look at the way the grammar is, the way it's chanted, there's a pause. There's a pause over there. No, someone's going to say, you're going to bring a proof from grammar. Well, that's how it's, that's how that's how it's put in over there. So very simply, I could say that it's not a lie at all. Because he says, I am, comma, Esau's your firstborn. He didn't lie. Totally told the truth. But what he's doing, you're right, he's disguised. He's wearing, Esau's, cloak or whatever. They had from Nimrod. They took from Nimrod. So, it showed he's really hairy. And that's why Yitzhak says, wow, you really feel like Esav, but you sound like Yaakov. Right? So then Yaakov says, you really Esav, my son, my firstborn. He says, yeah. And Esav is your firstborn. That's not a lie. Right? So technically speaking, not a problem. So there are other cases. We can say by King David. We use him as a case. Right? King David and Bathsheba. Talmud says anyone who said King David sinned is wrong. They're making a mistake. So now if you look at the verses, it looks really bad. Looks really bad. But technically speaking, what did he really do wrong? Uriah Hittite was liable for a death penalty. Right? Because he rebelled against the king. Right? So that's one thing. So he's allowed to kill him. Right? That's why he sends him to the front to die. But there's a second issue. Anytime someone went out to war, right? He gave up. What did the husband do? Gave a bill of divorce. Gave a bill of divorce. Retroactively. Meaning, if I don't come back, you're divorced. If I do come back, this is null and void. Right? Something like that. So, technically, when David took Bathsheba, right? When he took Bathsheba, she wasn't married. Right? He wasn't married to her. Right? If he's not married to her, then what's the problem? She's divorced. Right? So if you go to the book of Psalms, one second here. Everything going flying. You take the book of Psalms and you look at I think chapter 51 or 61. Let me see. Yeah, chapter 51. Right, it says, for the conductor song by David, Nathan the prophet came to him when he came to Bathsheba. He goes this whole thing, he chastises him. King David gets chastised by Nathan the prophet. Now, up until this point, he didn't think he did anything wrong. Right, 100%. Where is it? 100%. He didn't think he did anything wrong. Comes on Nathan the prophet and gives him a whole story. And while he's telling them, a certain thing, King David realizes what he did was wrong. Right? He realizes, that at a certain level that he sinned. But up until that point, technically speaking, there's no issue. Because first of all, she was divorced. He's allowed to marry her. Right? Second of all, her husband was liable for a death penalty. So he could send him to the front. But there was something there. Some tinge of something that doesn't make him look so good. Doesn't make him look so good. Doesn't necessarily mean he sinned. It could be at his level, maybe there was something. But the Talmud says clear. Anyone who says he sinned, make a mistake. Right? So there are a number of things. There are a number of things like that. That if we look at it at face value, it looks a heck of a lot worse. Now you tell me, the commentaries can do what they want and explain it this way, explain it that way, explain it another way. But they're trying to answer up. They're trying to answer up over here to show that it really wasn't that bad. Now, some may say, well, it's clear-cut idolatry. When I gave that class way back when on my subscription websites, when I gave it way back when, yeah, I went through the commentaries there. pretty darn scary because you think it's an open and shut case. And as we know, many things in Torah are not open and shut. They're not open and shut at all. Tanakh has to be learned very, very carefully. You need a lot of fear of heaven also. And that's why, maybe, kids, when they're, 7, 8, 9, 10, and, girls as well, they learn Tanakh. Girls learn it more in depth. The guys don't learn it in depth because, when they're learning Talmud, there'll be verses of the prophets. There'll be verses, the writings, whatever, and how the Talmud deals with it, explaining what it means. But it's complex. Not only is it complex, but there are things that seemingly the book of Ezekiel and other places seem to contradict the Torah. And if it seems to contradict the Torah, obviously it's not, but it has to be understood. Right? See, the Christians will pick on them because it's fun to pick on them. And that is, they'll bring Jeremiah chapter 30 as a proof. Right? What's their proof? They had new covenant. Now, doesn't it sound like that's a contradiction? There is no such thing as a new covenant. God never says he's going to boot us out of the covenant. God's stuck with us. We're stuck with him, so to speak. So there is no such thing. You can't add or subtract to the Torah. The Torah says. You cannot contradict Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, there's internal logic. We mentioned this a number of times. Since there's eternal logic, and I can't contradict the Torah, so now they have to come up with a magical explanation. A, why the covenant's been broken, and B, why the covenant starts with him. So they can say, okay, look, Jeremiah chapter 30, new covenant. Yeah, it's a good question why it says a new covenant. But what's it talking about? Jeremiah is chastising the Jewish people like he's been doing throughout the entire time. And he's telling them if they don't repent, there's not going to be a Beis Hamikdash. The temple's going to get destroyed. So the Jewish people thought as long as the temple's standing, no problem. No problem. So now you're going to say, so why does it say over there? Why does it say new covenant? Now, if you read the beginning of the chapter, where Jeremiah is chastising Jewish people, he's chastising them, telling them, I want you to go back to the old covenant. I want you to keep what God told you to keep. This is going to be a rejuvenation of the covenant. Not you're going to change it. Not you're going to exchange it, for something false. You're going to recharge it. You're going to go back to that same covenant. It's all about context. It's all about context. So I take it way out of context. I do get it. It says a new covenant. Makes sense. That, okay, so the other covenant's been broken. Makes perfect sense. But if you read the first part of the chapter, it's telling you about the old covenant. It's talking about reconnecting to the old covenant. So to call it a new covenant where the old covenant is broken up and changed and all that, totally different thing. That's not what it says. That's not what it says. It's talking about reconnecting. If it's talking about reconnecting, it's making it stronger, not changing it. It's a totally different thing. Totally different thing. So learning Tanakh, you have to be very careful. I mentioned this many times. I know somebody many years ago when I was first learning, said I'm learning Tanakh without commentary. This is a Jew, right? An Orthodox Jew. How do you learn Tanakh without commentary? Impossible. How do you learn Torah without commentary? Also impossible, right? A lot of it makes no sense, only because we don't know what the context is. We're not given any details. We're totally not given any details. So, the person has to be careful and where the information is going to come from. Tanakh itself, also there are contradictions in the verses where we're speaking about the end of days. And because of the contradiction, the Rambam says you should try and never figure out when the end of days are going to come. Because you make a calculation, you might be wrong. And if you're wrong, you're going to say, that's it. Torah can't be true. Well, who says what you said is true? No one ever said what you said is right. By any stretch. The Rambam says, it doesn't say you're not allowed to learn Tanakh. Right? He says, but you can't make your own calculations. because there are contradictions. There are reasons why the prophet said why they said. God told them what to say in their own language. But it's also, there are places to contradict. And if there are contradictions, when it comes to the end of days, so who's right? When's it going to be? Nobody knows. That's why it's hidden in secrecy. Nobody knows. And then you got some of the most difficult passages, language-wise, and that's where the Christians get all their stuff from. The things that are like very hard to translate. Oh, I know what it means. I got it clear, no problem. I mean, come on. They'll say, our explanation is just as valid as yours. Well, obviously we don't believe that to be the case. 100% we don't believe that to be the case. They'll say they have their own teachers, their own scholars, their own this. Yeah, and we have the rabbis, we have the Talmud, we have Medrash. That's what we have. It's a continual chain. It's not the purpose here to prove why, and all that, but that's what we have. So, there's a tremendous amount to learn in Tanakh. Tremendous amount. I don't think there's any question. But, you also have to have a lot of fear of heaven. You have to have a lot of fear of heaven going through it. It's hard, right, to see what's going on. There are times in Isaiah changes course, what he's talking about. Right? Not always talking about the same thing. One time he's talking about this, another time he's talking about something else. But you have to see within the context. Everything's within context. Right? I did this on Tanakh Talk about, going through a number of verses. This Freemason was trolling me, saying that angels have free will, which obviously we don't believe. So he brought me a whole number of verses to say that this is the proof that angels have free will. I said, okay, let's have some fun with this. I'm not the world's greatest expert in Tanakh. So I said, okay, I'll look it up. We'll go through a few of them. I did a few shows on it, right? About, the angels have free will. So, I went through a number of the verses. And 99%, when we looked at the verses, it's all in context. It's all in context. And if you missed the context, you missed it. They'll say, no, it really means this. It really means that. I would have had to been stoned, drunk, and who knows what in order to give that type of explanation. They're grasping at straws at best. But when you just look at what it says and what the context is, and a lot of times, the prophet's talking metaphors. Metaphors. But what's the metaphor for? Right? What's it going on? Who's it coming to explain? Or what's it coming to explain? So, you have to be able to see. So that's their opinion. You're right. You got a better opinion? You don't have a better opinion. Your opinion doesn't make any sense. You can say, but you're listening to the rabbis. You're right. And who else are we supposed to listen to? Which we mentioned many times. We have to listen to them. Right? This is what they say. This is how they explain it. Right? But they're very, very deep concepts. And they're trying to explain the most difficult concepts without a shred of understanding. But most of it has to do with what's going on. What the prophet is speaking about at that time. And it changes. They have to know where, what, when, how. But again, me looking up these verses didn't take me very long. Looked it up, read it, saw what it was, saw what it said. Okay, let's see what it's talking about. And there were many things that were pretty obvious. I didn't even have to look at commentaries. It was black on white. The problem is cognitive dissonance. They didn't want to see black on white. They wanted to see red on white or yellow on white. They want to make it up as they go along. But, the verse says this. It doesn't say what you say it says. Because the words don't mean that. Yeah, you don't understand. No, it's not what it means. You can't quote something, then build up a whole thing around it and say that's what it means when it doesn't mean that. They do that by the virgin birth. They do it by other things. Totally mistranslate. That's what they do. Right? That doesn't need to be explained. Right? But you're building this whole scenario based on a mistranslated word. Not only taking it out of context, that's a different issue. Because you can have, by Christianity, again, we'll pick on them for fun, they'll take things not only way out of context, But they say, oh, this is referring to JC, but it wasn't around. It's like 200 years before, 600 years in the future, whatever it is, right? They don't match. They don't match. And in the book, I think it's Permission to Receive by Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, wrote about, different proofs for God's existence. And at the end of the book, he wrote to the higher ups of the Vatican. And he asked them 3 questions. I think one of them was about the Immaculate Conception. I think a second one was I think about the lineage of King David and the discrepancy in the Gospels. I could be wrong on that, but there was one there certainly about historical inaccuracies. Quoting certain things where it was either well before or well after, JC's existence. So the higher ups in the Vatican didn't bat an eyelash, and they said that's okay because we live with historical inaccuracies. Now, by us, that doesn't go. First of all, you got to tell me what the text says. Now, if that's what the text says, what's it talking about? What's the context? It's going on, the first temple, it's talking about the second temple. What's it talking about? What's the context? Now, once I understand what the context is, then you got to say, well, does his scenario fit in? Was he around? And the obvious answer is going to be no. He wasn't around. Guys, to before, to after, doesn't matter. How does that not play a role over here? How do you look the other way at something that historically cannot be? I mentioned this by Islam. I mentioned this last week. Someone asked me, how do I know? Muhammad's not a true prophet. We don't believe in Islam. So I don't normally answer those questions. But, I took it to have a little bit of fun. I said there are 2 simple answers. There are probably hundreds. I gave 2. And there were also historical inaccuracies. Gross historical inaccuracies. Right? There's a medrash that says there were 3 people involved giving advice to Pharaoh. What to do about the Jews. Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, Bilam, the evil non-Jewish prophet, and Job. So Yisro said, don't do anything to them, and he fled. Bilam said, yeah, I should enslave them, murder them, whatever, and he was killed. Job didn't say anything, he suffered. He got suffering. Why? Because being silent is like you agree. So he suffered, he got suffering. Now comes the Quran, tells a similar story. There's only one problem. The Quran takes out one of them, takes out either Bilam, Yisro, or Job, and they take out one of them and put in Haman, Mr. Haman himself. Now, in the book of Esther, that happened 1,000 years later. Pharaoh did not live 1,000 years. He never saw Haman, not in his best day. He never saw Haman. None of them saw Haman. It's 1,000-year difference. Right? Unless he had the fountain of youth. He never saw him. One inaccuracy. Second inaccuracy, that talks about Moshe Rabbeinu's sister Miriam, and says Miriam and Miriam Magdalene, or Magdalena, whatever you call her, supposedly the mother of JC, were the same person. That can't be. About 900-year difference, at least. Right? 2 gross inaccuracies. So someone told me, oh, that's different. That's just a narrative. If you're claiming to be a book from God, you cannot make a mistake in the narrative. You can't tell me I was talking about JC, but he wasn't even born, or 600 years after, or whatever the case is. Right? If the historical inaccuracy does not get off the ground, right? The same thing by Israel. Oh, it's just a narrative. What do you mean? Did God make a mistake? I don't think God made a mistake. What, God didn't know? I mean, if you go through the genealogy, the Gospels from JC, JC to King David, the genealogy is different. There's discrepancy. Well, is it one line or the other line? It's a total discrepancy. So, okay, they live in fantasy. Both of them live in fantasy. Historical inaccuracies, discrepancies. You can't make a mistake. Your book cannot have a mistake if it's supposed to be divine. So my whole point is learning Tanakh. Learning Tanakh is, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to learn. Right? I just started the book of Isaiah. Book of Isaiah. I'm running past the first chapter. I learn about an hour a week. Usually after Shabbos. That's what I do in the winter. Summer I do at different times. Whatever. But I started from Joshua, work my way through. That there's a lot of stuff there in the first chapter. A lot of very interesting things, a lot of imagery, different things. So I can only imagine the further I get in, it gets complicated. And who things are talking about and what it's talking about, etc. It's not an easy thing to learn. But if you don't have a lot of learning under your belt, it's very confusing. Not only that, there can be contradictions. And if there are contradictions, we have to understand how to answer the contradictions. Because we do understand that beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there are going to be issues. If there are contradictions, we have to know how to answer them. Right? It has to be, that there's an answer. Because if there's not an answer, we got a problem. Someone asks, off topic, we'll take any questions. Someone asks about Yaakov. What was Yaakov afraid of? So it's a good question, because the reality is that God, Yaakov said, I want you to give me food, give me bread, and, give me clothing. God says, I'll take care of you. Don't worry. And Yaakov asked him a second time. So you could say, well, wasn't Yaakov afraid? Wasn't that a lack of emunah? Wasn't that a lack of faith in God? If God tells you, listen, whatever you're going through right now, don't worry about it. I'm going to cover you. You're worried about, you got a bill to pay in a couple of days. Don't worry about it. I'm here. I will take care of it. God comes to you, promises you, he'll take care of it. Do we have any doubts? We might have doubts. But if God would come to us and say, this is what I'm going to do, you have no doubts. Now, if Yaakov had the faith that he did, and the belief that he did, he went through all these trials and tribulations, God was with him. So what's going on over here? Where's the lack of faith? How can it be lack faith over here? So the Gemara says it wasn't a lack of faith. It was a lack of faith. What is he worried about? He 100% is worried, hey, am I going to do something to sin? And if I do something to sin, I don't have the same divine protection. And if I don't have the same divine protection, I could get killed. Now, he put his best foot forward, right? What was one of the first things he did? He split up his camps. So if God forbids, Esav destroyed one, the other one would get away. And that's where the Chofetz Chaim learned that if God forbids one group of Jews somewhere in the world gets destroyed, let's say during the Holocaust, there are going to be other Jews going to survive, right? There'll be Jews in America, Jews in Israel, Jews elsewhere. Even if one group gets totally annihilated, right? So how does the Chofetz Chaim know? Where did the Chofetz Chaim learn that from? From Yaakov. Because Yaakov had to put his best foot forward, right? Esau's coming with 400 men. So, they're not coming to have tea and crumpets, right? They're coming to wipe them off the face of the map. They're coming to wipe everybody out. In the end, he had mercy and whatever, God gave mercy, etc. And he wasn't going to do anything. He didn't do anything in the end, right? But what is he worried about? He's worried about he's not going to have the same divine protection. That's what he's worried about. So it wasn't a lack of faith. 100% it wasn't a lack of faith. He just thought he didn't have the same divine protection, right? It was if he does anything wrong at his level, because he want to get judged according to the character trait of divine judgment, so he's going to be held to a higher standard. And if he's going to be held to a higher standard, that means any little thing that he does wrong could destroy him. So it wasn't a lack of faith, right? Essentially, he's afraid he's going to sin, right? Essentially, he's going to sin. And if he leaves himself open to sin, then Esav has an advantage. And if Esav has an advantage, then maybe he's in big trouble over here, right? That's why. Otherwise, if I didn't have that explanation, I mean, could be we come up with others as well, right? But the reality is that if we didn't say that, or we don't come up with a better explanation or another explanation, then we're gonna have a crisis over here and say it's a lack of faith. It doesn't make sense. At his level, he's gonna have a lack of faith. Right? It's very hard to say. It's an extremely high level spiritual. And Torah never repeats anything for no reason. So if the Torah tells me that Yaakov said it twice, it's got to be a reason why he's afraid. There's no reason why he should lack faith over here. It doesn't make any sense at all at his level. Totally at his level. Right? That's what I would say. Someone there points out the commentary shines a light on context if someone misses it, right? But a person can totally take things out of context, and that's what the Christians do. That's what they're very good at, right? They'll take things totally out of context, But again, there are plenty of verses that they're hard to understand. They're hard in general, to understand. And if you only read it in English or whatever language, you're gonna have to come up with some level of an explanation, of what's going on. And as we pointed out, everything is in context. And there's a lot of, just like the Torah itself. The Torah, is a law book which did not give us a whole lot of information. Meaning, the Torah told us, okay, do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, do this, whatever it is, but didn't tell us how to do it. Now, one reason is that the Torah is a law book, and we would write down every last law and how it applies in the Torah. No one would ever finish it. You wouldn't even be able to walk around with it. You wouldn't be able to lift it. It'd be so big, right? It'd be like 50,000 volumes, right? Every line, major commentaries, medrash, this, that. You wouldn't get anywhere. Right, so it is a law book. 100%, it's a law book, but it's, it's just it's like a base. It's like an outline. It just doesn't tell me detail. So that's why we have oral law. Oral law gives me detail, right? It explains things from soup to nuts. What what it means, why it means that, based on letters missing, different things the rabbis tell us, midrashim. It has to be made sense somehow, right? We see over here, as we mentioned, all Torah is intertwined. We mentioned at the very beginning, talking about a woman's blood flow outside of her separation. Okay, so what is it? Right? She's separated for 7 days. Now she has extra, right? She got a bonus. She got extra over here. Now that she got extra, what's going on? Is it part of her period? Is it separate? Why is it said over here? Why is it said before? I mean, a lot of things going on here. We need oral law. Now, the Karaites will tell you, well, it's pretty clear. 7 days, she's impure and that's it. The rabbis add another 7 days, right? Or by a zivah, you got, if you saw 3 days, or if you saw many days, could be by them, it's only 2. If you saw 2 straight days, then according to them, you have to wait another 7 days. Right? By us, it's at least 3. Right? And they should be consecutive. So that being said, they're going to have to come up with explanations. The Torah tells me, just use one example, Torah says you can't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Tells me 3 times. Okay. Torah never repeats itself. Why is it telling me 3 times? Now, the Karaites themselves that don't believe in oral law, they have to come up with their own law. They have to come up with their own explanation. We understand what it means based on oral law. Well, they say, oh, we don't hold by the rabbis. Okay, you don't have to hold by the rabbis. Tell me what it means. Tell me why it repeats itself 3 times. They're going to have to come up, their own quote unquote rabbis, they're going to have to come up with a reason. But that's their own oral law. Right? They're going to, they're going to have to come up with some sort of explanation. So the Torah is a blueprint, 100%. Torah is an absolute blueprint. At the same time, it needs to be understood. It needs to be understood. Because there are no details that are given. And since there are no details that are given, the punishment could be absolutely severe. Person transgresses the laws of Shabbos, not all the laws are given. Liable for death penalty, being spiritually cut off. You eat 11 product on Passover, also get spiritually cut off. But how much? What if it's a mixture? Is there any nullification? How does it work? Torah doesn't tell me. Torah doesn't give me anything. Right? Now, Tanakh also, there are things that are more clear. You did this, you're getting punished. Right? The beginning of the book of Isaiah is all about Jews not doing the right thing. They're getting Musar over here, etc. There are things that are, relatively clear. But there are many, many other things, that we don't necessarily see the context. Right? We don't necessarily see what's going on at face value. We don't. I can read the words. I can read them over and over and over again. Not going to help me. Right? I can make up my own explanation. Doesn't mean it's true. Certainly doesn't mean it's true. But yeah, as we explained, everything's in context. Every last thing. Every last thing. Here's some points out back to Esav and Yaakov that Esav honored his father and Yaakov was away for 22 years. When Esav honored his father, he got all dressed up. I mean, I don't think anyone, come close to how Esav honored his father. Right? That's definitely a merit for him. Right? That's for sure. But that doesn't mean he has the right to kill Yaakov based on that merit. I mean, that merit's real. No question he got merit for that. Right? But at the same time, who says he's going to overcome Yaakov? Right? Who says he's going to even be able to touch him? Even if Lavan wanted to touch Yaakov, God came to him and told him, don't you dare touch him. You're not allowed to touch him. Now, you could say, well, in that merit, maybe you have the merit to overcome Yaakov. We see that's not the case. He might have got some merit for that. Might have got a lot of merit for that. But see, that merit got offset by everything else he did. That's true. That doesn't mean that merit was enough to overcome the fact that, Yaakov didn't honor his father for 22 years because he wasn't around. And that nullifies everything Yaakov's doing and he could potentially kill him. I mean that. Right? Having the merit, is a plus. Overcoming Yaakov and killing him is a different issue. Right? That's a different issue. Yaakov did know. That's not true. If you're telling me that Yaakov knew that, Yaakov knew the extent of honoring his father. He did know that. 100% he knew that. Right? And he was afraid of that. He was afraid that merit could overcome him. That's true. Right? Only in the context, he wasn't able to honor his father during those 22 years. But we see that wasn't enough. Because that offsets all the terrible things that Esav did, offset that. Right? So Yaakov had protection here. What Yaakov's worried about is that if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do and that protection goes down. Right? That's what he's worried about. Someone asks, how do you understand Torah when it's a code? So, Torah code is very interesting. I don't think it's going to make someone religious or convince them the Torah is true. It is interesting, that some famous mathematicians, escape my name, put the Torah through different codes, and you can see Hitler's name in there, Shoah and other things. So you go by a certain number of letters, 7 in this direction, 777, it comes out this word, that word. So I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely interesting that there is a code. How do you know when there's a code? I don't know. There's a book. I have to double check the name of it. But they have a lot of codes in the Torah that they put other books in, nothing came out. Chaucer, Shakespeare, other things, right? A lot of things never panned out. They put the Torah into certain things, and mathematically it came out many, many different ways. For different things. Now, does that mean the Torah is divine? Doesn't mean the Torah is divine. Right? Doesn't mean the Torah is from God. At the same time, it's not something just to push away. You can say, wow, that's an interesting thing. Right? That's a tremendously interesting thing. That other books don't have. So I would say that's a good piece of evidence. If a person only had that evidence for belief in God, that's not enough. I wouldn't say that's enough. You need cosmological evidence, sociological evidence, moral evidence, and you add this to it, then it makes it very powerful. But when it stands by itself, I wouldn't say that's going to make someone religious. That's not going to make a Jew religious or a non-Jew want to convert. I think it's interesting, right? No question about it. And Aish Torah, when they do a discovery seminar, one of the things they do is they show a number of codes in the Torah. I think it's a powerful mechanism. I don't think there's any question. But I wouldn't say by itself it has, it would have all the merits in the world to make someone religious. Now, someone's going to say, how do we understand when it's a code? So you have to see what they did, right? You have to get a book on Torah codes that are out there. It's pretty incredible. If you look at some of them, I don't think there's any question. How would we figure it out by ourselves? We wouldn't. They figured out mathematically. Yeah, some religious mathematical geniuses put the Torah to the test, find, every 7 letters, 5 letters, 4 letters, 8 letters, whatever it is, try and find the word Shoah, which means Holocaust, or try and find the word Hitler or whatever, and they found it. There are a lot of things that they found. We're not figuring this out on our own, right? That whole algorithm, of how they did it. But interesting enough, they put other books through the same algorithm. They didn't find anything. They didn't find anything. So in that sense, the Torah is unique. Well, I'm just pointing out that even if that's the case, that is not going to make someone religious by themselves. It's just not going to happen, right? It's a good piece of evidence. I think it's a good piece of evidence, and I don't think it's something we'll figure out on our own, right? So if the question is, how do we know it's a code? You look at these books, and you see what the code is. We ourselves not going to figure that out. Now, someone's going to say, is that a valid code? I think it's valid. 100%, I think it's valid. It's an interesting coincidence. I think you'd say better than that, because it's embedded in the text. And, these mathematicians brought it out of the text. Is that a clear-cut proof for God? No. It's not a clear-cut proof that, God created the Torah and God runs the world and all that. I would say it's a good piece of evidence. It's a good piece of evidence. Now, if you've already used other pieces of evidence, very compelling pieces of evidence, and you throw this in there as well, it makes it almost ironclad. Because I got other pieces of evidence. If I speak about Jewish history and Jewish survival, and how the Jews never should have survived, gone through all the pogroms, Holocaust, this, that. By the time they were destroyed by the Babylonians, Jews never should have regrouped. Right? And they did. Right? So now I could bring a proof and show through all the pogroms and how the Jews survived, how other nations, would have been demolished and all that. and you only see the uniqueness by the Jewish people through that. Now, is that enough of a proof to convince someone, oh, I'm going to be an Orthodox Jew now? That makes perfect sense. There's no other book you do that with. There's no other religion like that, blah, blah, blah. Right? There's not going to be enough evidence. It's a very good piece of evidence. Not going to argue that. Very, very good piece of evidence. Is that 100% going to convince the person by themselves? No, I don't think so. I think it's a very strong piece of evidence. Right? It doesn't mean it's going to convince someone. That's what I would say on that. One other thing I'll mention, someone here asked about coping and dealing with life in general. I'll say like this. During COVID, people ask my Rebbe this question, like, how are we supposed to deal with this? It's so hard being inside, our kids out of school and all this. Not to mention financial hardship, other things, many things going on. Many, many things going on. So his mantra was, and if you would ask him today, he'd say the same thing. His mantra was and is that God, I have to say every day, a number of times during the day, we should say it out loud, not just to ourselves. God, you're the one in charge. You're the one who runs the world. You're the one who runs the world. There's a story in Arut Sheva today that there was a terrorist attack in the old city, and my oldest daughter has a school there in the old city. One of the rabbis who teaches there was coming back from the Western Wall. He got shot. Where did he get shot? Right, and he was still wearing tefillin. He's still wearing his phylacteries. He got shot right in the arm where the tefillin were. That's unbelievable chesed. Could have shattered an artery. Could have shattered his whole arm. Right? I'm not sure he needed surgery or not, but kind of only a flesh wound, maybe. Yeah. You see something like that. How do these maggots get guns and whatever? I mean, it's crazy. What can happen here? Absolutely crazy. But God runs the world. One person was killed, and he miraculously, he had his tefillin on, coming back from synagogue, saved him. Could have had an artery shattered in his arm. Right? Absolutely could have had an artery shattered. So how do we look at that? God runs the world. Every bullet has its message. And we don't know. We don't know when our last day is going to be. A friend of mine, I went to see Thursday night. I was sitting shiva for his mother. His mother passed away. His mother had all kinds of medical issues. And this was totally unexpected. When I was sitting there, with them, a few doctors came in, a pulmonary doctor came in, that dealt with her, and a pain doctor came in. Nobody expected this. Nobody expected that. She sat up, she said something, then that was it. It was like she got the kiss from God, her soul went out, medics came within a minute. Trying to revive her, nothing to do. That was her time. It could happen that way. It could happen, God forbid, a terrorist attack. It could happen many ways. What do we have to see from all these things? We're not in control. We're not in control. So the question is how we deal with it. So we'll cut ourselves a little bit of slack. We're living in the Messianic era. The Messianic era, this is what we have to work on. Our faith in God. That's what we have to work on. And the fact that God runs the world, the God's in charge. Right? The God's in charge. That's what we have to realize. We're not in control of very many things. We think we are. We're not in control of almost anything. In general. Doesn't mean I don't have to put my best foot forward. Right? You see something like that, you hear about tragedy, people sick, young children, whatever. It's tragic. There's a lot of tragedy in the world. There's a lot of tragedies happen to Jewish people. Right? And if you don't have a backbone, you're not going to convert. It's tragedy. Being a Jew is not easy. We're like we're sitting ducks. Like people taking shooting practice. Beat up a Jew. Why not? What's so bad? That's the norm. Anti-Semitism through the roof. Right? The silver lining is that this is what's supposed to be by the end of days. That's the silver lining. You got to say, wow, it makes me feel so much better, right? I feel so much happier now, right? So to speak. Feel so much better, right? But we have to realize God's in charge. Well, someone asks, how can I ask Hashem to avenge the blood? Well, we say it every day. God, take away our enemies. That's what we say in the Shemona Esrei, the silent meditation. That's the point. Bottom line, what do we have to do? We have to work harder. Because if the Jewish people don't do what they're supposed to do, isn't there less divine protection? And if people are messing up doing whatever they're doing in the Holy Land, isn't God's wrath greater? It's greater. So, people say you have to work on this, you have to work on that, you have to work on the other thing. So it's more of a rep, you have to work on everything. You got to work at being better. Because if we were better, these things wouldn't be happening. It's based on what we do. Forget about the secular Jews and all that. We're going to fight them also for all the craziness they're doing. Not physically, right? When my Rebbe was yelling and screaming about it, what did he say? We got to commit to learn more Torah. We got to be better to others. We got to, keep doing what we're doing at a higher level. It's dependent on us, right? We got to work hard over here, no question. No question. What more can we do to turn around the decree that I mentioned? Beyond that, I'll tell you what, Diane Fisher, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may his name be blessed. I want to ask him, he's one of the Torah giants of the last generation, and I had a connection to him. So I want to ask him in the times when the Messiah is going to come, right? In the era of the Messiah, where we're living right now, how are we supposed to protect ourselves? So he said, what does the Gemara say? It says that we should learn a lot of Torah and do a lot of chesed. Do a lot of acts of loving kindness. Now, he's very sharp. And so I asked him, okay, and what else? He started screaming at me. He's like, what? You think I know more than the rabbis? You think I know more than the Talmud? I know more than the Gemara? That's it. That's what they said. That's what we got to do. That was his answer. When we make blessings, we got to make blessings carefully. We have to be methodical in keeping Shabbos, right? From the process of conversion. Work on tznius, work on modesty, what we hear, what we see, not speaking Lashon Hara. There are a lot of things. A lot of things to work on. Right? I'm not going to say one specific thing, not for me to say. We got to work on being better at everything we do. That's what we have to do. So Senator points out we can't be guilty of innocent bloodshed ourselves. We are guilty. Of course we're guilty. Why aren't we guilty? We do the wrong thing, these things happen. And not because the secular Jews, they'll get punished for what they're doing. But the onus is on us. The onus is on people who know better. The people that know better get thrashed around. We're the ones causing it, not just them. We want to say, oh, look, intermarriage is 70% and it's higher and it's this and it's that. Look at all the terrible things they do. You're right, it's all true. That's all true. But if you grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, no offense to anyone who grew up as a potato farmer, grew up in Idaho, right? You grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho. Is God going to slaughter you because of it? You'll be guilty, no question. But you're not going to be punished as much, depending on what you've done. But if you know better, if all of us know better, isn't the punishment that much greater? Someone will say, oh, because we're not doing enough for non-Jews. We're not doing enough for the Noahites. We're not out there for them enough. That's why God's punishing us. I don't have an obligation to be out there for them unless they come to me, even if we're a light to the nations. But that's not even the issue. We have to be better at everything we do. Everything we do. The onus is on us. See, it'd be very easy to pass the buck. 70% into marriage, 85% different places, assimilation, gay marriages, all these terrible things, right? We can easily place on the secular world. But if you don't have a brain in your head and you don't know which side is up and what's going on in the world in spiritual terms, then it's not their fault. They'll pay a price. Don't get me wrong. They'll pay a price. But see, we know better. We understand better. Right? Just like this cop chastised the kid for not, a 15-year-old for not putting on a mask, on the bus when, no one else is really wearing masks around. But believe it or not, it doesn't matter. He gave him like a $150 fine, but then he chastised him. He chastised him for it. He said, you wear a yarmulke on your head? You wear a hat? Aren't you embarrassed? Don't you want COVID to be over? And I was seething. I want to go up to the cop and say, you keep Shabbos? You moron? You keep any mitzvahs? That could have been a secret religious Jew. That would have been, totally demolished, right? But if he was a secular cop, he would have said that to a secular Jew. Why do you eat shrimp? You gonna say that to him? Of course he's not gonna say that. So why are we fitting game over here? Why do we get picked on? Why is everybody picking on me? Why? Why? Because we're out there. Because we're held to a higher standard, whether we like it or not. Right? So all these secular Jews are doing this, doing that. Is he gonna? He's also gonna scream at them for not wearing a mask, but he's not gonna go into their personal life. He's not gonna go in their life between themselves and God and say, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" No, you're an Orthodox Jew. You know better. You're right. We do know better. But see, nobody's wearing masks anyway, in general. Right? Throw here in Israel, public transportation, depending where you're going, driver won't let you get on if you don't have it on. No matter you believe in it or not, you have to wear it. You're not getting on. It won't take you, and that's it. Right? Cops can come on the bus. They can fine people, whatever. So, okay, you don't like it, too bad. You want to get a fine? Don't wear it. You'll get fined if they come on the bus. No, they don't always come on the bus. A lot of times they don't. Doesn't matter. Right? That's not even the point. But when you get off chastising someone and say, oh, you should know better. What does it have to do with anything? It's not between him and God over here. There's nothing to do with God over here. No one's wearing masks. Nobody. Not anywhere. Right? In most places, let's say. Unless they enforce it. So if no one's wearing masks and numbers are way down, so what are you chastising him? Because he has to be the higher standard. Now, you know what he's saying? No, you're the ones causing it. You're the Orthodox Jews causing it. Don't you want it to end? I don't know if that's what his intention was. Why in the world are you chastising someone for that? So I decided, I didn't want to go to jail for opening my mouth. So, and I had to be somewhere else anyway. I was on my way up north. So I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything about it. I was seething. This idiot's got a right to open his mouth like that. Chastise someone. Oh, where's your belief in God? Aren't you embarrassed? No, I'm not embarrassed. God's not telling me I have to wear it. And no one's wearing it anyway. If you tell me, 99% of the people all over the place, anywhere they go, they're wearing a mask. I get it. Now you're just flouting it. You're not keeping what they say. That's a different issue. But nobody's wearing it. Nobody's wearing it. If nobody's wearing it, then what are you asking? It's called discrimination 101. That's what it is. Guy's got a right to say that. He's got no right to say. He got no right to say. Someone says the wages of the sin is death. So is it the sin of the person itself or not necessarily? Depends on what he did. The sin is bad, there's no question. What's worse is thinking about the sin. Sometimes thinking about the sin is worse than doing the sin. Sometimes thinking about the sin, if I don't do the sin, you can get punished for it. Depends what it is. Right? But it depends on the sin itself. It depends where the person's holding. It depends, it depends what they, it depends what they know. It depends what they're going through. It depends on a lot of different factors. Right? But if it's something that's sort of blatant and egregious, you don't have an excuse. You don't have an excuse. You're in trouble. You're in trouble. So yeah, it is the severity of the sin. Yeah. Person can get toast for if it's really something severe. And if it's less of a sin, let's say, not punishable certainly by death, but you're on a much higher level. That sin could be, you could seriously pay a price because you're holding a much higher level. That's a different issue. That's a totally different issue. So, it depends on a lot of different factors. I can't speak in generalities, but I mean, I could, but it's not going to do anyone any good. It depends on a lot of different factors. A lot of different factors. If a person's not holding anywhere in the world, the sin is going to be less unless it's something egregious. If it's homosexuality, desecration of Shabbos, something like that, they're in trouble. They're in serious trouble. If it's something minor, let's say punishment not severe, okay? But if someone's righteous and the sin is really not such a serious thing by most people, they might suffer tremendously because of the level of the holding at. So, that's how it works in general. That's how it works in general. Someone asked, is Mashiach a person? He's definitely a person. The era of the Messiah that we're living in now, generation of the Messiah, that's a time frame, right? That's a certain process, that has to happen to reach certain things, right? But the Messiah himself is a person. There's a spark of a Messiah in one person every generation. The question is that person going to be able to reveal himself or not? And up until now, he hasn't been able to reveal himself. But there's a spark in one person every generation. And that person knows. So I'm not going to give away any secrets here. So in general, he knows. He knows that he's the Messiah. But he may not be, he may not reveal himself because generation's not worthy. Eventually it's going to happen. Right? But the Messiah, 100% is the real person. That is no question. That is no question. And he should come speedily in our days. But we have to realize one thing, and I mentioned before, that in this process of the Messiah coming, there's going to be a lot of tragedy. Going to be a lot of tragedy. This is when we need the most amount of faith. And that has to be our mantra, no matter what we go through. God, you're the one who runs the world. I'm just going to do whatever you say to the best of my ability. And that we have to live up to that. Doesn't mean we're not going to get tossed around. Doesn't mean we're not going to get punished. I mean, any of these things, right? A lot of things could happen, right? Someone asked before, chapter 34, verse 7. I don't think we're going to have a clear-cut answer here. Let's see. Dinah is only referred to as Jacob's daughter, right? And not daughter of Leah. Well, there's a, let me just see if anyone here speaks about it. A daughter of Jacob. Now, if you look at the beginning of the parsha, it says, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, went out to look over the daughters of the land. She took after her mother. Right? She wanted to see what's going on in the world. And what happened to her. Right? That's not a compliment. Okay, I'm not saying she deserved to be raped. Right? She didn't deserve to be raped over here. Right? Or abused, but she went out sniffing around. Seeing what's out there. Not saying she had to be chained at home. But, maybe looking in places she shouldn't be looking. And she got taken. So she takes after her mother, not after her father. I'm not saying this is the explanation per se, but Leah is the same. Leah was the same. That's why it says over there, she's the daughter of Leah. Because they the same personality. Same personality. But to mention her again, not going to be so nice over here after what happened. So you're not going to mention her. Say she's the daughter of Jacob. Now, it could be. It could be. Even if it says daughter of Jacob, could mean Jacob and Leah. Not necessarily a contradiction, right? I have to look into it further. But, being the daughter of Leah is not a compliment here. Rashi states clear it's not a compliment. Because they have the same type of personality. Too outgoing. Two wanted to be part of things. Well, I'm not saying she got what she deserved. Not saying that at all. But, she went out and she shouldn't have. She should have stayed close to home. But she had that type of personality. You're right. Doesn't matter if she had that type of personality. Doesn't mean that, certain things just shouldn't be done. And it could cause problems. It very much cause problems. I'll say that. Someone asks, was she not going out to share Torah with the women? No. She was not doing that. I mean, it's derogatory, what it says, right? Again, go back to the beginning of the parsha. What does it say? Sorry, the beginning of that. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob, went out to look over the daughters of the land. Now, it doesn't seem like she went out to teach. That's not what it's talking about. So here, Yaakov, thought he'd find tranquility in the land of Israel. But his family had to go through this moral outrage for his own flesh and blood to establish sacred character of purity. Right? Could not tolerate others might consider commonplace. Okay, she went out and she got taken. Now, again, Rashi says, she wanted to go see what's going on in the world. She wasn't out there to teach Torah. That's not what she was doing. Even though it says she went to look over the daughters of the land, right? It doesn't necessarily mean her own people, right? I mean, see what's going on in the world. Question why it says daughters of the land, good question. I'll look into it further, but it's not complimentary, right? It's not a compliment over here, right? I would say, in my own language, I would say she's like a gad about. Do you want to be out and see what's going on in the world? Doesn't mean she got what she deserved. But she went out looking at things she should have been looking at. And that's why, and that's what happened. Now, it could be other reasons. Purity reasons we mentioned, Rabbi Hirsch, since so far Hirsch brings down, whatever. It could be other reasons. I'll look into it more. But it's not a compliment. Definitely not a compliment. The precursor to feminism? No. Well, she wasn't a feminist. She wasn't a feminist by any stretch. Yaakov hid her in a box so Esav wouldn't see her. So the question is, why did he give him to Esav? Maybe, he's going to repent. Why did Yaakov give him to her? He's punished. This is what happened, the punishment. Because he hid her in a box. Not just she went out or whatever. It's just, that might be why it happened. That might be what happened, but the reason for what happened is because Yaakov didn't want her to be with Esav. Now, she could have brought him to tshuva. She could have had a tremendous effect on him. You say, why do that? He could have had a negative effect on her. True. So there's the whole thing there. The whole thing there, but it's punishment. He got punished because he didn't give her the opportunity. Right? That also needs further explanation. Because we'd ask, why do you have to give her an opportunity? To try and bring her brother back to tshuva. Why does she have to do that? He's punished for that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Any other questions? All right. I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Sunday, 9:00 Eastern time, 4:00 Israel time next week. It's gonna be right before Hanukkah, so I'm not going to gonna have a problem lighting candles. Either I'll give a class after. I probably won't because it's gonna overlap. But I'll put up a thing next week. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman or Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. You can send me an email at rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com. Wishing everyone a good beginning of the day.